On the night of February 21st, 2014, the president of Ukraine packed all of his belongings into a Russian helicopter and fled the country, never to return again. He still had 10 months left of his term. On March 18th, 2014, Russian soldiers began annexing Crimea, kicking off the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II. The war continues to this day. And on February 28th, 2025, American President Donald Trump told the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, "Your country is in big trouble. You're not winning. You have to be more thankful. Let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards." 2 out of 3 of these strange occurrences can be explained by the Euromaidan Protests, also known as the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity. This was a series of about 4,000 different demonstrations which took place across Ukraine from November of 2013 to February of 2014. The protests began when Viktor Yanukovych walked away from negotiations to join the European Union after a mysterious meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Yanukovych ran on being the guy to get Ukraine into the EU, so when he instead announced that Ukraine would try to join the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union instead, people felt betrayed. As time passed, the protests eventually became less about the EU and more about the future of Ukraine as a country. It's important to remember that for a mass protest like this, there are a diverse array of motives which motivate people to take to the streets. People demonstrated against corruption, oligarchy, and authoritarianism. What they all wanted was for Yanukovych to step down. At the movement's peak, there were about 1.5 million protesters across Ukraine. However, they were most highly concentrated in Kyiv, at the Maidan, or Independence Square. They began in the western parts of the country, however, they eventually spread to the east as well. The protesters were from a number of different ideological groups. There were left-wing anarchists and extreme right-wingers, although these made up a very small portion of the overall movement. Although activist groups played a central organizing role, the overwhelming majority of Euromaidan protesters were simply ordinary Ukrainians. Both the working class and the middle class were present. The average age was 36. There were students and young people, the employed middle-aged, and a significant amount of retirees, people over 50. If we retreat, there is no way back. Because if Maidan gives up or is marginalized, the result will be mass arrests and the strengthening of dictatorship. These people won't surrender their power so easily. They will cling to it till the very end. These are the words of an anonymous 51-year-old Maidan protester, and they grimly prophesized the government's response to this show of will. The crackdown began on November 30th, a week after demonstrations began. Berkut, Ukraine's security forces, violently cleared Independence Square, beating protesters with batons and using tear gas. This enraged Ukrainians and expanded the protest. It was this violent escalation which brought protests to the east, where Yanukovych's political support was the highest. Once again, the government chose to escalate. They launched a campaign of repression on their own citizens. They kidnapped journalists, bussed in thugs from eastern Ukraine to cause mayhem, and continued to brutalize protesters on the streets. Yanukovych even tried to pass anti-protest laws, which effectively turned him into a de facto dictator. Once again, this intensified and ignited the protests. Maidaners began to respond with their own violence. In one last desperate attempt to squash the movement, Yanukovych faithfully ordered his security forces to open fire on their own citizens with sniper rifles. Over 100 people were killed and thousands were wounded. Ironically enough, it was likely this violent response which brought about the government's downfall. On February 21st, just 3 days after the shootings, Yanukovych's security forces abandoned him. They feared that they were on the losing side and that they might be prosecuted for the shootings. With no one left to protect him and his entire country turned against him, Yanukovych finally fled. Taking advantage of the instability, Putin annexed Crimea just 1 week later. The Euromaidan revolution holds a bittersweet status in the Ukrainian national consciousness. On the one hand, the country united to rid themselves of an oppressive dictator. However, on the other, the protests began an ongoing period of chaos and violence, which has led to much of the country being ravaged by Russian invasion. In the words of a Maidaner looking back, "I am 100% sure that there are times in life when you have to fight for a better future. Otherwise, the future throws you into the shadows."